Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Reading with Tatiana. I apologize for the different background and kind of chaotic and the awful lighting on my skin. I'm still in the process of moving between homes, so currently I'm filming in the basement of someone's home. And yeah, it's just your classic 90s fluorescent lighting. So today my book review is on The Tattooist of Auschwitz by Heather Morris. It's kind of a memoir style historical book of the story of the Tattooist of Auschwitz, and I would give this book for sure a 5 out of 5 must read. As always, before I go into my in-depth review and commentary on this book, I would appreciate it if you can hit the subscribe button, if you can give this photo a thumbs up, and if you can leave a comment if you read the book or have any suggestions of what I should add on my to-be read list. I'm going to start my review talking about the author Heather Morris, as I like to kind of give a little bit of info about the author, as it kind of gives you context on how they came to the story, and also a bit about why they were compelled to write this story. So Heather Morris is originally from and resides in New Zealand. She is primarily a screenwriter, and in 2003 she met someone who told her that they know someone who has a story worth telling, which is the Tattooist of Auschwitz, obviously. And you may be wondering, how did someone that was the Tattooist of Auschwitz came to reside in New Zealand, which I will tell you later. I realized when I was editing and splicing this video together that I never tell you later. So the reason how Heather Morris came to meeting Leo, the Tattooist of Auschwitz, is because after Leo and Gita, his wife, was able to escape, they actually through a series of trial and tribulations in their lives, they went back to Slovakia. They eventually decided to live out the rest of their life in New Zealand, and that's how Leo and Heather Morris crossed paths. So originally, when Heather heard the story of Leo, she was going to write a screenplay because she is a screenplay writer herself. But after interviewing him for over 3 years, she decided that the story was better as a novel, which we can see here. And to be honest, having read this book, I feel like as a screenplay, it probably would have been amazing to see it come to life and see it represented through actors and movie magic and that kind of stuff. But I feel like if it was a screenplay and it was limited to a movie or a multi-series TV show, I feel like it would have missed a lot of internal dialogue. So I'm really glad that Heather Morris decided to do a novel instead of a screenplay. Heather Morris had interviewed Leo over 3 years when getting the story of his experience at the concentration camp. He died in 2006, so even though she had interviewed him over 3 years and he had passed away in 2006, she didn't actually finish and publish this novel until way later in 2018. So this book is actually pretty recent, as it was published 4 years ago. Since then, this novel has been translated to 45 languages and is also a New York Times bestseller. But honestly, I feel like this story, how could it not be a bestseller? It's such a unique story, and just something that I feel like it's almost like, I think it was my first book review of this year, which you can find on my channel earlier, but I almost feel it's one of those books that need to be in the high school curriculum. Anyway, so I did want to see if this novel got picked up to be an adaptation of any sort, since Heather is originally a screenplay writer. I did see that it was picked up for a multi-episode series back in 2018, and it was meant to be aired in 2020. However, I couldn't see anything that was released in 2020. It said that it was going to be called The Cry, not The Tattooist of Auschwitz, but I couldn't find any follow-up, so I'm not really sure what happened. And to be honest, I don't even know if I want to see what was described in this novel to be depicted, even if it's in a set or film format. So yeah, that's a bit about Heather and also how the story came to be. So as I have shared, she interviewed the tattooist himself, Leo, so it is based on a true story of his experience in Auschwitz camp. A bit about the background of the story. As I said earlier, Leo, he was interviewed over 3 years, obviously towards the end of his life, and he actually didn't share his story until after his wife Gita died, who is also in the story. I'm actually not sure if it's pronounced Gita or Gita because they are Slovakian, so the Eastern European name. But yeah, he didn't share their story until after she passed away, solely because he felt that because of their unique experience in Auschwitz camp, he was worried that what they did in order to survive would be deemed as being a Nazi conspirator. So it's crazy to me that he was scared to share it for so long. And if he had never shared, or if something happened to him before his wife died or shortly after she passed, it's just really crazy to me that this story could have been lost in history. And it makes you think about how, with so many events happening in our world at all times right now, like there's so many amazing stories of resilience and strength and pain, and a lot of them aren't shared. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to read this book, and I'm so glad that Heather's path in life came across Leo's path as well. Leo, our main character, is from Slovakia, and basically the story starts with him actually en route to Auschwitz camp, and he's taken in like these metal containers where they're normally meant to transport horses. And throughout the story, we find that he is from Slovakia, and also he is Jewish. So he is brought to his camp solely because they were told that every family must send a man to the camp to work in order for their own family to remain in Slovakia. So Leo took that responsibility as the son. And so he enters the camp, and by chance, or I'm not sure by chance, but he just knew that he wanted to dress sharp. So he wore a suit. And because of that, he kind of had a bit of power from the other prisoners that kind of looked up to him. And Leo had a very unique situation where he was multilingual, so he was able to speak German to the guards. He was able to translate to other prisoners because the guards or the SS officers will only speak to the prisoners in German, and it's kind of like either you understood or not. And if you didn't understand what they were saying, they would hit you until you understood what they were saying. So Leo kind of had that leverage at the very beginning, and quite early on in the prison, he meets the current tattooist of Auschwitz, and at this point, I think it's kind of the start of the camp. So there's more and more prisoners that come every day, and the tattooist needs a second man in charge, who he picks Leo to be. So Leo then becomes his second in command, and then one day the main tattooist disappears. We don't know what happens to him. Leo never finds out, and he becomes the main tattooist. So during this time at this camp, Leo kind of shares his experience of all the awful things he sees. He, for example, like one night he went to go pee to relieve himself, and he sees 3 prisoners just using the bathroom, and a few SSRs come by and just shoot them for no reason. And not saying, I mean, they are in the prison. Obviously you could say that, oh, if the prisoners were doing something they weren't supposed to, they would get shot. But it seemed like at this camp people were getting killed for no reason at the whim of the SS guards. So Leo kind of shares that, and he also shares him witnessing people getting gassed, and just after people die, just bodies being left naked, askew, not being properly respected. So he shares a lot of that, and like as I said earlier, this is his true experience at Auschwitz camp. So it's pretty crazy to hear it, and hear a first-hand experience. So one day when he's tattooing a prisoner that's coming onto camp, so people only get tattooed when they enter a camp, and they get tattooed like, I think, a several digit number. In the book it seemed like everyone had a 5-digit tattoo. So basically he tattoos this young woman, and he for some reason is compelled to her. So he wants to find a way to be able to talk to her. But as you can imagine, in this camp, everything is very controlled and very separated. There was lots of labor to do, and tough labor, and there isn't really a lot of free time. So Leo has to find a creative way to be able to contact her. So one thing he does is, as a tattooist, he is able to walk around the camp more freely than the other prisoners, and he has his tattooist bag where it has all his tools. So he finds a way to barter with different people because everyone has a price, and by bartering like chocolate for jewelry, for money and that kind of stuff, he is able to use this leverage that he's gained through other prisoners, other guards, and also even local people who work in the prison to buy and find time with Gita, who eventually becomes his wife. So it's kind of like a story of hope and what love can get you to do, because we do know, because the story is shared, that they both do escape the camp, which is kind of like a great silver lining of this book, even though it's such a grim and awful story in history. I'm not going to go into too many characters unlike my other reviews, just because there are many characters in this book, and I feel like each character, even if they were there for just a page of the story or for several chapters or throughout the life of Leo, they're very unique. And I really want to urge people to read this book, just because I feel it's like, I don't know, it's such an important book. It's not just like a textbook of history, it's literally someone's first-hand account, and they weren't just a prisoner in Auschwitz, but they were actually someone where he's Jewish and he's a prisoner at the camp, and he has to tattoo all these incoming prisoners. So like, it's kind of hard because you're a prisoner and you don't want to do this, but you're kind of left with no choice to do this in order to survive. And like, I think about how these incoming people who are getting tattooed by Leo aren't even aware that he's also a prisoner. They may just assume that he's part of the Nazi party and he's just doing a job. So the book kind of touches on that a lot, how a lot of the prisoners themselves, they're kind of made to torture other prisoners, and if they don't, they get tortured. So it's interesting to see all different characters and how there's two folds, I guess. The first one is that everyone has a price that they're willing to pay to gain something, when it comes to Leo bartering with them and exchanging so Leo can get more time with Gita. But then you also see that what people are willing to do to survive, and even if it means harming someone. And like, one prime example is there's a part in the book where Leo gets tortured, and he gets tortured by this really big, I believe he was Jewish or a war criminal, this guy. And this guy, like, he's a prisoner himself, but he's assigned to be the main torturer because he's just a big, tough guy. So when he sees Leo, it's kind of like, in a way, beautiful, because this guy has the power to torture Leo, but because Leo has helped him previously, and also because they're both prisoners, the big tough guy tortures him enough to satisfy the guards, but not enough that it would actually kill him, because he doesn't want to do that. So it's kind of cool, I guess. That's not the right word, but it's kind of cool in a way, because they're able to help each other to kind of give the Nazi guards a fake feeling of, they have all this power, but actually all the prisoners are really helping each other in prison as much as they can. So this book is a lot of pain, but I also feel like it's a lot of hope in the time when you feel like there is no hope and it's like just a really awful place. So I want to touch on some common themes in this novel. I kind of already talked about all of them, so I won't go too deep into them. But, I said earlier that I feel like this book should be in every high school curriculum, is because I feel it's such a prime example of what it means to be human. And, being someone that's from Canada and living in a first world country, and I feel like if you're watching this on YouTube as well, you're probably from a developed country as well. Or if you have interest in watching this video, obviously. It's just, I think, so important to read something like this, where, people like Leo living in Slovakia, he probably had a good life with his family. He was happy. And I think during this time in the world, like, no one really imagined war and no one wants war. But overnight, things can just switch. And when it happens, like, you don't have the voice or the power to fight for what's right. You just kind of have to go along with it, especially when the Nazi party had so much power to overtake people and force them to do things. So this book, I feel, is just a prime example of what it means to be human, and also like kind of make you realize how you have to be so appreciative of what you have, because it can change overnight. So some common themes, or the main theme for me, is what it is to be human. And I think it's a good discussion for anyone to read this book and talk about and think about what you would do in a situation when it really feels like you have no hope, but like you can't do anything because you have to survive. You can't, and when you're a prisoner, even if you don't want to do anything, if you're just lying there and laying down, the guards will beat you. You're forced to do labor. So it's hard because you don't want to work, but you have to. And like a lot of people in this book do things that they would never do outside of war, outside of being in Auschwitz, but they have to because if they don't, they won't survive. So it makes you really think about the limitations of humans, and also like in such a dark place, how you can find hope in the smallest of places. And like it's really amazing how Leo and Gita met, fell in love, and got to escape and also live a life together in the future. So this book just made me feel a lot of emotions, and it was a quick read in the sense that I wanted to see what would happen, but I also needed breaks to really digest what I was reading. So yeah, those are the common themes in the book. Things I did not like in this book, which I think is an obvious one, which I've touched many times, is I think if you're faint of heart or don't like hearing people getting tortured, this book is probably not for you. But having said that, I feel like it's so important because these are things that has happened in our history, and not only has it happened in our history, but it's happening now all over the world. And you know, we're just very fortunate that it hasn't happened to us, but you just never know when things could just change just like that. Two things I really liked about this book, which kind of tie back to the themes, is I really like how Leo was able to share all the different relationships he formed in the prison. And just as I said, when there were characters that he met with just for one page or for several chapters through the book, and him just meeting people from both sides. You know, he met people who were prisoners who were Jewish, he met people who were SS guards. I wouldn't say befriend, but in a lot of ways he did befriend this guard who kind of became the biggest leverage for him, and that's not an easy thing to do because you have to be able to navigate. So I really like seeing how Leo used his creativity to gain leverage in the campgrounds. Another thing I really like was just witnessing the empathy people had for each other at a time like that, because there were people who would share, people who were starving, they were like super gaunt, super like sick, yet if they got some bread, they would share a bit with a fellow prisoner, because you know, it's better that we both are less hungry than just one person hungry. So I thought that was like really good and very inspiring to see that in the book, all the empathy that people had for each other. On Goodreads, this book got a 4.27 out of 5, which I think, as you know, if you go on Goodreads, anything over 4, I would say is gonna be a good read. Most of the common bad reviews I noticed were people thought the story, like how believable could it be, like did Leo really experience all of that? Did he really have all that leverage? Was he really that successful in the way navigating and manipulating the Auschwitz camp system? And I like to believe that, you know, this book didn't say it's a textbook, it didn't say it's a historical factual book. It is, at the end of the day, a memoir, a story that Leo told of his experience. So it is very subjective. I don't think Leo or Heather Morris, the author, was saying that these are the facts and this is what happened. Like, he shared a story decades after the war ended. So I think at the end of the day, he's just sharing his personal experience of his experience during World War II. And, you know, he's not intentionally trying to rewrite history. He is just sharing his history. And I think people saying how believable it is really unfair to him, because it was his lived experience. Other negatives that I saw on Goodreads, I'm just sharing negatives because I think it's kind of fun to see what people didn't like, considering it's overall a 4.27 book. So other things people didn't like was that they felt it was too dialogue-y, which makes sense because earlier I mentioned that Heather Morris is a screenplay writer and not a novel writer. So I think when she wrote this book, she kind of wrote it as very dialogue-y, and it's not a screenplay at all, but I can see how it's lacking that internal dialogue. But I really didn't feel it took away from the experience of Leo and Gita, and if anything, it kind of added to their experience, you know. So I felt that wasn't really a negative, but I think maybe because I read a bit about Heather and know the context of her going into this. So yeah, so that's why I'm sharing that as well, because I think it's important to frame your mind before you start reading this book. Another interesting fact I wanted to share was that when cross referencing all the events that happen in this book in terms of the timing and that kind of stuff, it is 95% accurate, which I thought is pretty cool. That 95% of the things that Leo said does make sense and you're able to cross reference. However, it is interesting that the official Auschwitz Memorial Museum doesn't support this novel and say it is too fictional, which I can see because I want to share that when I was fortunate to have the experience of going to Auschwitz in Poland a few years ago, and when I went there, I was really pleasantly surprised that the tour guide, he is a descendant of someone who was a prisoner at Auschwitz. I think he was like a grandson or something, and he never said, and I think it's how the tour is made, is they never say that Hitler and Nazi Party are evil people, that they're born evil, but instead they really emphasize the idea that Hitler could be any one of us, and these Nazi guards who did all these atrocities, who chamber gas people in the masses, it could be me or you. Like, we're all human and we make decisions every day, and one decision leads to the next one, to the next one, and you just never know where it would take you. Not that it takes away from what they did was evil and awful, but I think it was amazing how there's a lot of empathy towards these people who did these crimes. So I can see why the Auschwitz Memorial Museum had the stance that they don't support this novel, because this novel, from Leo's perspective, is he really thought the guards were bad people and evil. So it has this like I guess perspective or narrative, and I think Auschwitz Memorial Museum wants to stand with that. They want to remember what happened here, but they don't want to, I guess, fault people, because when you do that, I guess it makes you forget that history could repeat itself if you're not careful. So I think that's why they don't support this. So I thought that was an interesting fact. Reasons why I think you should read this novel, The Tattooist of Auschwitz, is because there actually is two more in the series. So in addition to Leo and Gita's story in this first book, there's Sika, which is Gita's, I guess you would say, best friend in the prison, and she actually becomes like the woman of the head honcho at Auschwitz. So she actually later on becomes guilty of being a Nazi conspirator, but I would argue that she had no choice and she was just picked to be the head honcho's like main woman. So she gets interviewed as well by Heather Morris, and her story is shared. So I really want to read that as well. And then the third book in the series is called The Three Sisters. I didn't actually read the synopsis, but I'm going to guess it's probably about Gita, Sika, and their third friend's story, which is interesting because I assume Heather Morris had the chance to interview Sika and I guess the third girl, but as I said earlier, Heather didn't meet Leo and hear the story until Gita died. So I guess we'll never hear Gita's side of the story, which is unfortunate. But yeah, I thought it was really cool how it's a trilogy if you want to kind of read more about the experience. And the second reason why I think you should read this book is, as I said way earlier in the video, it's adapted to be a TV drama. So if you are like me and like watching the adaptations of novels you read, I think that's a good reason if it ever gets produced, because as I said, I haven't seen anything online yet. And now I'm going to share how this book made me feel. As you guys always know, I love to add this part as part of my review, because if you ask me in a year or 5 years or 10 years what the book was about, I probably would remember that. If you ask me who the characters were, all these plot details and that kind of stuff, I probably won't quite remember those things, but I'll always remember how a book made me feel. So I think a simple word or simple feeling that this book made me feel was, it made me feel sad. And I don't need to go into it. You've watched this review. Like, it's sad to read about what happened, but I'm glad that it was able to be shared, and I just feel like I'm so fortunate to be able to have read this book. So yeah, this book made me sad, but it is a important sad to feel, and I hope you read this book, and I hope you feel sad too. That is my book review of The Tattooist of Auschwitz. If you have read this book as well, please leave your comments down below and let me know what you think of my review. If there are any things that you agreed or disagree with, I would love to have a discussion, and I'd love to hear what you thought of the book. I will also introduce my next book, which I have already also finished as well last night. I'm a bit behind in my filming as I am in the process of moving. It's hard to find time and space to film. But my next book is by Toby, and it's also a memoir. And if you haven't noticed, it's probably one of my favorite genres of reading. So this one is called How to Lose Friends and Alienate People, and as you can tell, it is a movie adaptation with Simon Pegg, who's a great comedic actor, Kirsten Dunst, Megan Fox, and Jeff Bridges. And the reason why I picked this book is, as you can see, it's surprisingly not a library book. So I picked it because I'm staying in a place where the posts have lots of books, and it was one of them. So I picked it, and I'm glad I picked it because I normally wouldn't actually read this kind of memoir. So it was different. And yeah, I'll save my review for this book in my next video, but if you have read it, please check it out when I do post it shortly, and I'll be happy to hear your thoughts on it. Alright, bye guys!